it's very likely we won't have a clear winner on the night of the election. It's also more than plausible that there's going to be controversy around the election until, January 20th, when someone gets inaugurated on that day. We have a couple of stories just off the top. The idea of mass deportation, that's for reals. I really do think that that is going to be the plan. This notion of the Fifth Circuit, I mean, it just shows you how important something like that Colin Allred race is. Because if we have one Texas senator and we hold the Senate, the chances of sort of like breaking up the Fifth Circuit over the course of the next 4 years, not breaking it up totally, but putting a couple more Democrats on there and disempowering that. Because every day we're talking about some ruling out of the Fifth Circuit. This one undercuts the National Labor Relations Bureau. This stuff is hugely important, and actionable. We can stop mass deportations. It's actionable. This is not a drill. Molly Redd and Andy Kroll are going to talk to us about a guy who was Donald Trump's former, Office of Management and Budget, which basically it's like the COO of the country. Although I got to be clear, I don't know really what a COO does, but Chief of Operations, the guy who's going to be responsible for really dismantling the administrative state. And this time around, Steve Bannon announced that's what they wanted to do the first time around with Donald Trump. They just didn't know how to do it. But this guy that we're going to be talking about, he's the one who came up with that whole Schedule F thing in the waning days of the Trump administration. This is all real. It's all real. It will impact the lives of millions upon millions of people for potentially decades. In the meantime, I heard this morning. Longtime listeners know that I try and listen to the bottom and the top of the hour AP headlines on normie stations, because I'm trying to get a sense of what is the news that someone who doesn't follow the news, follow politics gets. Sometimes it's disturbing, sometimes it's funny. This juxtaposition, I don't know how much of a difference it makes, but it struck me as pretty stark. This is just, about 30 seconds of the AP headline news this morning, 6 days out from the election.
Trump and Kamala Harris aren't wasting any time.
Standing on the ellipse near the White House,
Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other.
Harris said that's who he is, but that's not what America is, and not what she will be once elected.
I pledge to be a president for all Americans.
Trump had earlier blasted Harris as unfit to be president.
A total train wreck who has destroyed everything in her path.
Sagar Megan.
There
Washington.
you go. That's quite a juxtaposition. I mean, I don't know if it makes a difference, to be totally honest with you, at this point. It's going to come down to is how do these undecideds break? And do they break in a way, or do they just sort of split up together? It's unclear. It's very difficult for me to put myself in the mindset of somebody who just now is just starting to check in to the election. And, even as a kid, I was very, relatively engaged in politics. Here is, and, this is one of the things that Harris has had to do. And, she's not my favorite candidate in the world. She's obviously an upgrade from Joe Biden relative to where he was.
Just reminded us of that.
Who just reminded us of that. Completely oblivious, apparently, to what her challenges are as opposed to what his would have been. But here is CNN they're down with a Georgia voter in a barber shop. And one of the things that Harris has had to do is contend with the fact, and we don't hear much about it at all. She would obviously be the first woman elected president. She would obviously also be the first black woman elected president. This campaign is not geared around, let's break the glass ceiling. She's not referencing any of that. And it's obviously still there in the minds of people who maybe have issue with black people, or maybe have issue with, like, can a woman really be president? Is that allowed? Here is CNN in this barbershop. This is from yesterday.
One topic of conversation has been the idea that some men don't want to vote for a woman president. Do you think that's a factor?
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. What do they say?
Women are too emotional to run the country.
What do you think of that?
What do I think of that? I'm married. You think I'm about to answer that?
Well, what do you say to them?
What do I say to them?
Yeah, when they say that.
I tell them the same thing I told you. I'm married, and my wife run my household. So, you know what? If they run a household like that, they could. I believe they can do it. I just thought about it. I believe a woman could run the presidency. I believe that.
One top.
I mean, this is the way that people are making their decision about voting. We just need to send somebody from CNN to every single voter and say, how about thinking about it for 5 minutes?
Yeah, I mentioned this the other day, but Matt Duss's podcast, he had on a guy named Chris Schell on episode 202, October 27th. Who Matters? Foreign Policy's Place in the Presidential Election with Chris Schell, but it's mainly geared toward the black turnout specifically. And things that come up are like Gaza, Ukraine, immigration, climate change, and China. And a lot of this is like, think about Biden and what's he saying? Look at NATO and look at all we're doing for like standing with our allies. And there's certain things where people say like, well, what about us? What's going on with our community? And I think that's more real than the misogyny thing is going to be covered, I think, a lot, and it probably will be. There's a lot of people that will elaborate that as a reason, but I think like the real problem is, why can't we turn people out for their own, like we're mentioning crypto and stuff like that. I don't know. I think that's the real problem here. If she loses those margins.
Well, I mean, we're going to have to see. If she loses, there's no doubt that the Gaza policy inhibited turnout. I mean, there's just going to be no doubt about it.
And just general foreign focus, like all the China stuff. And
I'm not sure that people are terribly invested in the China stuff, but that stuff, what happens is once you create a narrative, there's a lot of things that can sort of ride along on that narrative. And I mean, that's why Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden took off the way that it did, is because that's an underlying theme of the campaign. And so when there's anything that is even like, remotely related to it, it's almost like it becomes a magnet. It sticks to the hull of the ship, as it were. There's a lot of foreign policy stuff that would stick to the hull of the ship when you're financing and aiding and abetting, if you want to call it ethnic cleansing, like the editorial board of Haaretz called it, I think it was yesterday. If you want to call it genocide, like an esteemed historian from the University of Jerusalem called it again in an interview with Le Monde yesterday. However you want to call it, the slaughter of tens of thousands of people, that's going to create a narrative, and other things are going to stick to it in a way that they wouldn't if you weren't doing it, or if you had distanced yourself. And it's going to be both the first order votes that are lost because of it, and it's also going to be the enthusiasm from people who, I mean, young people are the most idealistic. That's why it's young people who generally are the most active in these type of political campaigns. And they're the most idealistic, and they can be also the most disappointed by these things. And so you're dampening their enthusiasm. Who know? We'll have a better sense of this in a week, but certainly part of it is going to be some type of like vague misogyny.
And I also think there's a submerged women who won't vote for a woman vote out there that isn't as easy.
That's on the right.
That's not as regularly elaborate, or in the sort of center. I don't know, like that's what worries me about this sort of centrist outreach, because I don't know, I don't trust them. As I've seen somebody say, like, my mom was one of these people who like couldn't vote for Hillary and voted for Biden, and then all of a sudden is wavering again, and it's, I don't know, an aversion to seeing a woman in power sort of thing. But,
right. It's not because Biden was too much to the left.
Yeah.
I think there is definitely, but there's frankly, with all due respect to people my age, there's less of us than there were during Clinton's run. That's how change happens. Honestly, there are ideas that end up literally just dying out. Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.